Hi, welcome everyone. Nice to see so much people. I was thinking I want to be close friends. Do we have any non-Swedish speakers here? So you want me to take this in Danish, I take it. Cool. Yeah. Good, good. Um, my name is Andreas. I work for a company called Voyado. We're doing some really cool stuff using both Azure and Aurelia. Um, Look us up if you want to do something new and exciting. Used to work in the Azure team previously, also doing a lot of Azure stuff now. Web is just a hobby of mine. I lift weights and spend time with my family when I'm not working. So this is the plan. I got some 50 slides to go through. Hopefully I'll manage to do that. If you have any questions, I love to talk about them and answer whatever you can think of. Although I prefer if we can save it for the end. That way, hopefully, I manage to get through all the content. So the plan is to briefly talk about the Aurelia history for those who are not in the full know of what it is. Talk about what makes Aurelia different from other JavaScript frameworks. Then we'll get into the juicy bits, what's new in Aurelia 2, how you can get going with it if you want to try it out. Still early days, but might be fun to kick the tires a bit. Look at components, dependency injection, take a look at the router, discuss the plugin slightly or briefly. Have a small chat about productivity, hopefully. And then if you got any Aurelia 1 apps, how to upgrade them to 2. Just before we get going, some quick gymnastics. Everyone, who knows what Aurelia is? Have you used Aurelia 1? So there's a couple who haven't used Aurelia at all. And just a few. Okay, so this will be mixed. That's good. Those who haven't used Aurelia, your background, are you C#, Java engineers? Hand up. Good, good, good. Good crowd. Okay, cool. Then this is for you. Frameworks comes a dime a dozen nowadays. A lot of jokes being made about every day there's a new JavaScript framework. How do we keep up? There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of invention as well. Have to say that the JavaScript ecosystem is very vibrant. There's a lot of new stuff coming out every day, every year, every month. The history of Aurelia is quite interesting. I don't know what we call him, the founding father of Aurelia, the guy who originated everything, is called Rob Eisenberg. He is an American, works for Microsoft right now. He has been doing developer tooling for a very long time. That's one of his passions, making developers more productive. Long time ago, he started with a framework called Caliburn and Caliburn Micro. That was for SAML developers. Long time ago. That was released in 2011. Then he started looking at JavaScript, and this was around the time when Knockout came out. Excuse me, I assume that most of you have heard about Knockout, might even tried it. Yeah. So that framework was called the Randall. It's actually being used still today. I made a search on Stack Overflow, and still people using it in production. And I think version 3 is out right now. Rob has since then left the project. Somewhere around 14, 15, he started thinking about the Randall 2. He had a lot of great ideas, but he felt it was diverging too much from the Randall. It was too much new, so he wanted to call it something else. and that was when Aurelia started taking form. There's a long stretch here, and you could think or wonder what was he doing during the time. He actually got a job in the Angular core team. And this was before Angular 1 was released. So he was part of that. He was working on the router and some other bits, but they realized that they didn't have the same view about what software engineering was and how you supported your users, which are developers in this case, in the best way. So they parted ways, and in 2016, version 1 of Aurelia was born, or released. And then we have a huge stretch here as well. This is, in JavaScript terms, about 10 lifetimes, right? In between here, we've had Angular, Angular 1, Angular 2, Angular 3, Angular 4, Angular 5, Angular 6, Angular 7, and Angular 8. And we're talking about breaking changes here. We have kept the API for Aurelia stable this entire time. We have one package that I actually did roll from version 1 something to version 2, and that was because we changed internal APIs. So no breaking changes, but we knew that some developers had been utilizing that internal API. So we actually bumped that to version 2. And that is saying a lot about how considerate we are. So we want you to be productive. We don't want to break your builds. So we want to keep things stable, and have managed to do so for about 5 years. Quite impressive compared to other frameworks. And now, hopefully, 2020 version 2 is out. That's what I'm here to talk about really today. Still early days. We're pre-alpha even. So some of the things I'll talk about today might change, small caveat. Although hopefully most of the APIs I'll be discussing today are fairly locked down, and hopefully you won't be too pissed with me afterwards. What makes Aurelia different from other JavaScript frameworks? Convention over configuration. This is one of our core pillars we believe in very strongly. That is, if you use things the Aurelia way, we hide all the cruft for you. You don't have to set up a lot of routing or components or anything. If you just use the naming conventions, it's smooth sailing. You don't have to type any specific Aurelia code. It just works. Standards compliance. We believe that standards are supposed to be withheld. A lot of other frameworks come up with their own special, could be bindings, command expressions, whatever. They have tags that's not even HTML compliant, so they have to build and bake everything before they can show something in the browser. We don't believe in that. We want to keep it strictly standards compliant. HTML should be strictly compliant. Same with the JavaScript. We try to keep that as standard as possible. We have a really performant binding engine. We have since day one almost been top of most performance charts, and it's a reactive binding, so some of the frameworks you can only bind one way and you have to pull in something else like some JX library, reactive library to get two-way binding working. We have always had two-way binding working, and now it's even more performant that we have rewritten everything this version. Dependency injection. This is why I wondered what background you had if you hadn't been working with Aurelia or before. As a C# engineer or Java engineer, you can't really create a good application without dependency injection, right? That's our livelihood. To get everything composable, testable. It's not a lot of JavaScript frameworks that has that, and especially not. I claim to say this is in our very spirit, in the essence, and in our core. So, what's new in Aurelia 2? Documentation. If you have been working with Aurelia 1, you have probably got some opinions about the documentation. We know about that. We aim to improve, of course. We have a new way of rendering our API docs, which we believe will be a great improvement for you. We are moving our documentation to Gitbook. So we had our own implementation before, which meant it wasn't super easy to update. So hopefully the flow of updating and community content, etc., will be easier to handle. Of course, a lot of new and improved content. And if you want to, still very early days, many parts not filled in, but you can actually see the new Aurelia 2 documentation at docs.aurelia.io if you want to. Performance. A lot of work on performance has been done. So memory efficient class-based runtime that's a mouthful. There's been a lot of discussions lately about JavaScript classes not being performant. You should always use POJOs, plain objects, JavaScript objects, right? Turns out the V8 engine, to be able to optimize your code, needs to run it hot, and when it does that, it actually creates a class behind your POJOs. So just using POJOs, not so super efficient, at least not in V8 in this current implementation, right? So whatever you read on the internet, JavaScript classes is not bad. Quite the contrary, it's really good. Update batching, we've had that. We just improved it. It's rewritten. The DOM update granularity is it's improved, and that is just when you update something on your page, you need to ensure that only a small part of the DOM updates, right? And the more granular you can be, the less overhead you have, because you don't want to do update the whole page just because you change a single number somewhere, right? Task scheduler, that's a new one. Anyone that follows the recommendations from TC39 and the new JavaScript proposals? That guy. Oh, well, he's my colleague. He's like, yeah, I love that stuff every Friday evening. Task scheduler is a new proposal where browsers are implement a task scheduler. It's not quite done. It's on the proposal. So we implemented actually one of our own. And we've noticed it's quite good because you have different priorities to certain work tasks. So what's really high priority could be prioritized, and that which is not prioritized can be less prioritized. It's like rocket science, but it's really good performance-wise, because I mean, if you got stuff that's changing on the page all the time, you want to do that. Background tasks, fetching something, whatever from the server it doesn't need to be prioritized. You need to render and you need to keep the UI snappy. So that's a good thing. Time slicing, also really good. If you have long-running tasks that will pass over your frame rate, drawing will become janky, application will be perceived as slow. This is really good, means you can have long running and most of all a lot of tasks, but they won't be sequentially executed all the time so that you get the janky UI. It will be chunked up so that the UI can render, but you still get all the work done. Multiple observation strategies. I don't, anyone's following Vue here? Vue.js, heard about it? Small framework. Okay. Some people know about it at least. They've been talking a lot about observation strategies lately and how getters and setters are not good and proxies are super good. It's just a way of observing properties in JavaScript. We have implemented proxies. We only had getters and setters in V1. Cool, but not as all as performant as they were claimed to be. Difference, not that much. Startup time, really good for proxies. If you have big page, thousands of values that need to be bound instantly when you start a page, proxies are good. Might be better, but if those 1,000 values needs to be updated every second or something, getters and setters might perform better continuously. And you can set your binding strategy to either proxies or getter setters on component. This is actually app startup. So you can do it if you prefer. You can do it on app startup, which means that all children will inherit same property and use proxies if you prefer. Or if you have something you can use like getters and setters, that's still the default. But if you have a component or with a lot of children, when you want instant startup or really good startup times, you can just set the binding strategy on that component, and then that component and its children will inherit that. Performance, some numbers. Still pre-alpha, right? Give or take. This might change, hopefully for the better. We're seeing app startup time is about 10 times faster, which is good. Was good before. It's better now. This should be in parentheses. You know what AOT is? Yeah, out of time compilation. This is not implemented. It's in our roadmap. It won't be out in alpha. Might not even be in the beta, but we're going to get AOT eventually, and it's going to be really good. It will increase stuff like, especially startup time, 100x. So if it took 1 second to start, then it takes 100 seconds. No, just kidding. So that's good. Collection observation is much faster, about 5 times. And sorting, reordering lists, about 30 times, which is quite good. And this is in version 1. We didn't reorder elements in the DOM, as we actually reordered them on screen. We just kept tabs of where stuff were, right? Now we're actually reordering in the DOM, so shuffling stuff around later on will become faster. Web standards. Cool stuff. Shallow DOM. Who uses shallow DOM in production today? Anyone? Hand wavy. Shadowish DOM. Not proper shallow DOM, but is it proxy or? Oh, okay. Oh, oh, that really one. No. So when it's like 4 or 5 years ago, Shadow DOM was the rave. Everyone was talking about it, right? It's the possibility to encapsulate your components fully. because bleeding CSS and styling has always been a huge issue. When you base your entire application on small components, it's just you got this one colleague Friday evening, important after, and then you break all the styling because it bleeds through. So Shadow DOM, that was the promise of encapsulating components properly with CSS. So no styling should bleed, and no styling could actually be injected from the outside either. It was fully encapsulated. We've had an implementation of that, or we have, but since Shadow DOM haven't been like properly implemented in all the browsers either, it's been so how it's been working out for people. So good thing to know is that if you're using Shadow DOM, you most likely have CSS bleed right now. But when this will be implemented fully in browsers and frameworks, you will be totally encapsulated, so it will kind of it might break your styling. Decorators, we hadn't used that before, just enhanced, slightly better now. Adopted style sheets. Now, I'd like to know who came up with that. That acronym is kind of unfortunate. But it means it's the possibility to actually style things in the Shadow DOM, or rather share styling in between elements that are defined in Shadow DOM. CSS shadow parts is the possibility to outside Shadow DOM style properties inside a Shadow DOM element. CSS modules is really cool. That's my favorite. It's a new standard. It allows you to. One of the things it says is that styling is just bundled with your component, and we do that now in Aurelia automatically. It's really good, and it also helps encapsulate your components, because if you use CSS modules the way it's implemented today, it tweaks for example, a class name. It tweaks the class name slightly, adds a hash to it, so that if you use it to style a component, it won't bleed. So it's good. Check it out if you haven't tested it. Scheduler, well, that's the task scheduler I was talking about. It's an upcoming web standard. We have implemented a version of it. Extensibility. Resolvers and registrations, we had that before. You've seen app startup, I take it. Well, some of you that used Aurelia at least. Metadata, we had that as well. It's slightly improved now. Startup tasks have been greatly improved, I'd say. Startup had a lot of, well, had a few APIs that you can call on it, register and plugins, etc. Now everything that you inject in the startup container is either of the type iContainer or a class, which makes, well, it's a really clean pattern. I can show you an example later on. Attribute pattern, binding command, and instruction renderer. It's basically if you want to extend Aurelia syntax, you can do it very easily right now. It's slightly more advanced context, but you could, for example, you can use it to say you have a huge Angular application, you want to start shifting things over to Aurelia. Then you could use those to implement Angular binding conventions, and then just use the same files, but with Aurelia. Looks like this. So if you just, these 6 lines, define that in the class, inject that class in the dependency injection container, and then anywhere in your HTML templates, you can use Angular syntax. That's extremely powerful. At least I think so. Vue. You prefer Vue? Vue's action syntax. The at click. 6 lines. And there also Vue's value binding. Super simple. I mean, you go forth and convert thy Vue components to Aurelia. Simple. Less craft, better, faster, cooler. Now Vue is cool as well. Scaffolding. If you want to kick the tires, start with Aurelia 2. There is a really neat way to do that. In Aurelia 1, we have the CLI. Who's using the CLI? Good, great, okay, cool, nice people. NPX. I don't know if you've tried that. It's the possibility to, instead of npm install, use NPX, which actually executes packages that are not on your machine. Safety. Feels a bit, but it's really cool. NPX makes Aurelia, means you don't have to install anything like you did the CLI, you install that globally, right? So this just kicks off the makes tool, which is generic tool, not ours, but you can give it skeletons. So it knows how to kick off an Aurelia app. You get nice CLI with loads of fancy text graphics, some ASCII art, I think, and then you get to choose what bundler you want to use. Right now we got Webpack and Dummer. Transpiler, use Babel or TypeScript, so JavaScript or TypeScript, whatever you prefer. Support CSS modules and shadow DOM. You just get asked if you want to use it and rigs everything for you. You can style using CSS, Less or Sass. Unit testing right now it supports Jasmine, Mocha and Chai and Tape. And for end-to-end tests we have Cypress. We used to have Protractor as well, but it's been a bit messy, right? So we're not going to implement that, I think. Anyone using Protractor right now? Good. Okay, we're cool. So it's that easy. So you can try Aurelia too. Oh. Components. So every Aurelia application is built of components, all the way down to components. Super simple to create them. So how? Conventions. We have great conventions. Name your HTML template, name your TypeScript file, name your styling file, the same name. Aurelia will automatically assume it's a component. Styling is new, right? We didn't have that in V1. You had to require and then the styling file. So you don't have to do that anymore if it's named the same as the component. Custom elements, we have just like we did in Aurelia 1. Anyone use that? You've done everything. Cool. Yeah, it's just used decorator, named it. You can step outside the conventions if you feel like it. Now also we have functional composition of elements. Really handy for those who prefer functional programming. And import. The Trident era is over. Just a couple of days ago, Microsoft released a new Edge, right? The old version of Microsoft's implementation of the JavaScript engine were forked from IE. which was called Trident, the old JavaScript engine, right? That clashed. We couldn't import this ECMAScript standard right now for importing modules, right? And we couldn't use that because it clashed with Trident. But now we can use import since Trident is no more. So instead of require, like we had in Aurelia 1, just use import now. You can also globally register your element as well if you don't want to have requires or imports on every page that you use your element. Just register them globally. Binding syntax. Nothing's changing compared to Vue 1, version 1. Although it's much better because it's rewritten from scratch, more performant, better code. Some examples. Can you see this from the far back? Cool. Simple HTML template. Backing model. Same name, right? And then in your application, you would just import it with the base of the file name. This one. And you can use it. Super simple. Can you see it's Aurelia code? No, it's just standards, right? No shenanigans. We hide everything behind our back. Data binding. Super simple. This is an HTML only element. You don't have to have a backing JavaScript file or model. This is really cool. It means less places to introduce bugs, right? And as you see, this expression is a JavaScript expression, so it could be a backing variable or something, but here it's actually doing something, some logic. If activity is empty or if it's not defined, then the variable should be code, otherwise bind it to activity. In my main app, where I use this, I have defined activity in my main app, and I can bind it to the component, even though there's no backing JavaScript model. The HTML only element can handle it. Do note the bindable element. Haven't seen that before. If you used version 1, every template was wrapped in the template tags, right? And on the template tag you had bindable and the names. Don't need the template tag anymore. Even less craft. So if you want to skip forgo conventions and create a custom element, this is the way you do it with the decorator. And previously, when you use conventions, the file name excluding the ending is what you want to look at when you import and use it. Here you actually specify the name. So the file name is skip conventions, but when you use it, it's going to be non-conventional going after the name. But you import the file from the file name, right? And here you have, this is like JSX style almost. Inline template instead of a separate HTML file. You can do that as well if you want to. Functional composition. A custom element define. This is actually what's behind the code. If you look at declarating a custom element with the decorator. So this is what being executed behind. A really good way of setting up tests here. I think we have some, it's about 2 gazillion tests right now.
About 70K tests, 70,000 tests that are running for every new build we do.
That's pretty amazing. Many of them are using this defining element, testing them, etc. And I talked about global global declaration as well, so you don't have to import constantly. This is the way you do that. So we have an arbitrary component, small one. Then just create a file where you export star from your components, however many they are. I have this, I don't know if this is good, I have this small tick where I use an underscore first just to denote that automatically the file saves up so nicely in the Explorer, so I be reminded all the time that I need to enter my new components into that file. Otherwise they won't show up and I'll sit there and debug and wonder what's wrong. This is the way the startup looks like right now. So you just import your everything from your components file here that you defined, all your components or views or whatever they may be. Could be just classes if you prefer that, right? So import that and then just say register, and this will put it in the DI container. So it will be available from every view and every class in your application. Lifecycle events. I wrote name changes ahoy here because we changed a lot of stuff, and then I realized it's mostly in V2, but we changed a lot of stuff from V1 as well, and it's more than name changes. You might recognize these if you worked with version 1, right? So these are stages in the component's lifecycle. And you want to, if you want to change something in the DOM or react, say you want to bind data to a component and react to that, well, you better see to it that you can't do it in the constructor because the data haven't bound yet, right? So you need to be aware of these and use them at the correct time in the lifecycle to be able to perform certain things. So if you want to manipulate the DOM, then you need to be using attached because the DOM needs to be attached first. Stuff like that. Also detached and unbind if you want to make sure that you dispose of certain things that you have declared. We're changing this and hopefully making it much clearer. Also slight renaming going on in Aurelia 2. So it's good to be aware of. This is one of the things that you have to consider when if you're lifting applications from version 1 to version 2. Dependency injection. Every programmer has been doing type languages. Certainly can appreciate this, I hope. We have a really good dependency injection container. You can declare singletons, transient, lazy if you have really expensive resources, and with callback if you want to have a callback after it's been registered and want to perform actions after it's done. And this is, I think this is super cool. If you're using TypeScript, who's using TypeScript? Anyone using JavaScript in their Aurelia version 1 apps? Need to change. This is the new thing. So C#, Java, everyone's working with interfaces in their dependency injection containers, right? Now you can do that in TypeScript as well. I think it's so cool. You create a symbol and then you have an implementation and then you register those in the DI container, and you can create a symbol from an interface. We have a helper method for it as well. Just DI create interface of whatever service you have, and then you can use that in declare it in the DI container. And that will make it possible for you to say that this is of type my interface. This is something you couldn't do before. Really cool. And there are several types or ways to use the DI container. Either class decorator, we had this in version 1. Those who use TypeScript used auto inject heavily, I suppose. I love that one. Can't count the number of hours I've been debugging Aurelia version 1 apps because I forgot writing auto inject. I didn't get injection in properly in my constructors. We have another way where you create an array that's always named inject, just a static inject, and we will inject your dependencies. Or we have a parameter decorator. This is my new favorite because this moves the declaration so close to where you declare your dependency. Auto inject was like above the class before, so that's why you forgot it all the time, at least me. Now it's just ahead of my my dependency, so I won't forget it all the time. Really smooth. And the fact that you can use interfaces, that's super cool, if you ask me. Not everyone is equally excited. So here's an example. We're using the helper method. Simple interface, just returns a string and a method. Implementation. Register it in the startup as a singleton. And then you have the different versions, either above the class, static inject array, or my preferred favorite, parameter decorator. Super cool. And you can use it. Now, I should really could use 50 minutes for this. Everything is almost rewritten from scratch in version 2. Everything is super performant, everything is really cool. But the router is where the new stuff, I think the coolest stuff is at. It's we're taking few new grips on it that's to my knowledge not available in any other router. So some small notes going from version 1 to version 2, we're using goto instead of href. So that's a search and replace spot for you if you want to upgrade later on. The general thought is that everything that's available in version 1 should be available in version 2. Not quite there yet, but hopefully we will be there in alpha. And if you prefer to use href instead, for legacy's sake, you can just declare that property, and hopefully it will work, or of course it will work. Lifecycle changes probably happening because many people, me included, mistake active for attached. Attached was one of those component lifecycle. This is the router lifecycle. Probably will be enter and leave. That will make it can enter and enter will happen, and then before bind in the other list I showed you, can leave, leave before detach, etc. before unbind, those. So demo, first demo. Hopefully. There we go. And there you see the new startup as well. Show that briefly. So it's super simple. That's just one of my services, a class, and that's an I container, I reckon. Configuration for the router. See, let's start this up. That was slow. here we go. Can you see this in the back? So, just a small application. It's a reading list. I have a couple of books. Click on them, get some information. Small about page. So the meat of it is in the book page, right? About and home was not that big. So you saw the routes. About, home, and books. Usually you had a configuration table for that, routing configuration. Everyone loves writing config rules for routing tables, right? Looks like this with the new router. There's no routing config table. So this is declaring the viewport of the router. And since we're using goto, the router is clever enough to figure out that, well, the closest viewport is this. I'll just inject my content there. And it just works. That's super cool. I mean, routing configs are a pain, right? So this is kind of amazing. I know of no other router that can handle this without routing configs. Also, you can have parallel viewports where you choose to inject content into each with just one link click if you prefer. Fortunately, I haven't got a demo for that, but it's super smooth. Check the details view of the book. I don't know if you noticed. There's a small cross here. If I close that, I empty the viewport. I can actually do that from within the viewport, and it's just a navigation. Just inject dash into the viewport, and it clears it. And this is really cool. So you can actually because there's no viewport here, right? In this view. This tells it go up one step. You'll find the viewport, and you inject that content into the viewport, which makes it possible for me to clear the viewport. No configuration, no routes defined, and it just works. Also, this is quite cool. Go to book/details view. Here, that's a deep link. There's no viewport here. There's nothing behind. There's not even a code behind here, right? It's just an HTML element. But still, the router can figure out where it needs to go, travel. And this is actually into the HTML element books, and opens the detail view in the viewport on the side. This is mind-blowing. This is super cool. I think I'm really bad at conveying this, but this is just... I'm giggling on the inside just talking about it. Yeah. Oof. Okay. So, I'm slightly behind. Oh, you're kidding me. Sorry, I'm not a PowerPoint jockey. Plugins. HTTP client. We have it. It's done. It's the same API as the V1 fetch client, though, mind you. So you can start playing with that as well. Some improvements are coming. I18N is done. Validation is done. Almost-ish. Store is coming along well. It's not totally finished, but almost. SSR, we're working on that. We got some work to do on enhance, but right now AU2 apps render as good on Node as they do in the browser. So that's going to work splendidly when we're done with enhance. Testing, a lot of work is going on to make your testing better. Productivity, wish I had time to show this. The Visual Studio Code extension is really good. It's got go-to definition and stuff now for version 1. I recommend you check that out if you haven't used it. Upgrading, it's going to be search and replace most of the time. If you've done anything special and used APIs in an unorthodox way, might be an issue, but it should be kind of cool. Here's the resources. If you want to take a snap, this is where you will find presentation and code and a lot of other Aurelia resources. Thank you.